From his thoughts on the Mother Emanuel tragedy 6 years later to trying to close the Charleston Loophole, I speak exclusively with State Senator Marlon Kimpson for this edition of Quintin's Close-Ups. And if you haven't already, subscribe to my YouTube channel and like Quintin's Close-Ups on Facebook. State Senator Marlon Kimpson, welcome back to the award-winning Quintin's Close-Ups.
It's good to be with you, award winner.
Thank you so much. I really do appreciate it. As you know, this week marks 6 years since the tragedy happened here in downtown Charleston at Mother Emanuel, which 9 people obviously died, and of course you had some victims and survivors. Where are you emotionally 6 years later, Senator?
Well, it's a trying time for not just me, but the entire community of Charleston, if not the nation. To this day, I don't think that there's been a shooting of this magnitude in a church that resulted in 9 deaths to date. And while there have been a number of other mass shootings, the church has always been a sacred place, a place for worship, a place for fellowship, and in the case of Mother Emanuel, a place for social justice and change. And so our lives will never be the same because we knew these individuals personally. And so we are still in a state of mourning for all of those victims of this tragedy. But to be sure, we have a renewed sense of hope to continue to carry out the legacy of those who perished due to the hands of a malicious racist that was not in some ISIS organization, but a homegrown terrorist right here from South Carolina. And for that is a disgrace.
How have you renewed your hope, Senator?
Well, Quintin, I've been working. And so I'm on the grind, like many of us in the state legislature, to further the causes of the 9 who perished. We all know Reverend Senator Clemente Pinckney and what he stood for. But there were 8 others whose lives I'm still trying to really grapple with what the relatives would say they wanted us to carry out their mission and their life's goals. And so for me, I will observe the anniversary of their death with a day of work for those causes so near and dear to each and every one who perished their hearts.
Yes, sir. And that brings me to the obvious. This is obviously June, and as you know, it's Gun Violence Awareness Month. Congressman Jim Clyburn said that the House Democrats have passed 2 gun violence prevention bills, including his bill to help close the Charleston loophole. He says inaction on this issue cannot continue. The Senate must get these bills to the president's desk immediately, he says. Let me ask you this, Senator. What type of mental health funding does the state currently have for this?
So, with respect to the closing the Charleston loophole, the issue there is requiring a complete background check. And so many of the Republican Party, unfortunately, have kowtowed and carried out the wishes of the National Rifle Association, who has fought this measure, this common sense approach, since day one. It's really a shame in the aftermath of the Sandy Hook shooting, where we had more than 20, I think it was 26 school children murdered. We talk about the church, but equally a troublesome place is where all these mass gun violent acts are occurring on school property. And so many began to form bipartisan coalitions to get to have something as simple as a background check. We weren't banning assault weapons. We weren't banning, although I support that. We weren't banning any type of gun per se. What we were trying to do is get a background check. So in Congress, nothing happened then, and unfortunately, in the aftermath of the massacre at Mother Emanuel, nothing meaningful has happened. We appreciate Congressman Clyburn's leadership, but his leadership and the vote majority is in the House, and he has successfully shepherded this legislation through the House twice, as you mentioned, and done an outstanding doing so, but we have reached a stalemate or an inability to successfully have this issue even heard on the Senate floor. The first time it passed and the second time it passed, there is an inability of the people that control or hold a significant number in the Senate. We are the majority in the Senate, but as you know, it takes 60 votes to have something considered. And in that regard, we got 50, tiebreaker Kamala Harris. We don't have 60 votes. And so that means we got to have a bipartisan coalition, and we have not been able to muster the numbers to get a bipartisan coalition in the United States Congress, in the Senate. Now, in South Carolina, it's even worse. We're going backwards. We are passing gun expansion bills. This year, we passed open carry.
Right.
So we're going to walk down Main Street. We're going to go in our parks or restaurants or neighborhoods, places that you could conceal carry. You can have a gun in some of those places I mentioned, but it has to be concealed. Before this bill passed, it had to be concealed. Now we got open carry.
Right.
So when you go to the park, or you sit in a restaurant, or you go some other place, you're going to see people with military artillery. That bill passed by a solid Republican vote, with most of the Democrats in both bodies voting no. But we don't have the numbers to stop it. This McMaster fella, who's governor, has pledged that he'd sign the bill. I think there's a 90-day waiting period before he signs the bill, but he's indicated he's up for re-election and needs to kowtow to that Trump mob. This is red meat for those people by signing the open carry bill. They wanted open carry, Quintin, without training. At least this bill requires people who open carry to have training and some type of valid identification. But they wanted a bill without training. In fact, to appease that group who wanted the bill, they call it constitutional carry.
Right.
But to appease that group, now there's no fee to get a permit to carry, and they're going to refund the money they would have spent to undergo training to a tune of about $11 million that it's going to cost our budget. So we gave them open carry and their money back.
Well, let me ask you this, Senator. Should everyone have to have a permit to carry openly or concealed?
I think they should. Having a permit, and when I say permit, it's a permit not so much for you to buy the gun. It's a permit for you to carry the gun with you. And South Carolina has had a concealed weapons permit for a long time now, meaning that you would have to go through some training on the use of the gun, how to retrieve the gun, how to observe, instructions from law enforcement, how to identify yourself as carrying a gun. These all things will still be in place, but instead of requiring it to be concealed, you can carry it open. So I think you should have a permit in this way, because at very least you are trained on the use of a gun. Using a gun is not as easy as most people, particularly if you didn't grow up around guns. I mean, we have guns now that can mow down crowds in a matter of seconds, and you can only imagine someone who's haphazardly strolling down Main Street, goes in a Starbucks, spills coffee on themselves, has a open carry on them, and not knowing how to properly handle a gun, what kind of chaos that, and there are many other scenarios. There are numerous stories of people carrying guns on their body and falling out, loaded. People have purses and, mishandling the purse, and the gun goes off and shoots the person in the foot. We're talking about places where there are children, places where there's very, very close proximity to others. This is a dangerous step backwards, in my view.
Let me ask you this. Hypothetically, would an open carry with a training bill over the constitutional carry been a very good compromise in your mind?
I don't understand your question. Repeat your question.
Would an open carry with a training bill over the constitutional carry bill been a good compromise instead?
Oh, I got you. Well, that's what they say. The fact is that the people that voted for the open carry, they call it open carry with training, did it as a compromise so that they could save face for their constituents, and said, look, I gave you open carry. There was a much more extreme group pressing for open carry without training. So what we did is take a already very extreme position. We sprinkled it with training to rationalize why we supported a very dangerous gun bill. And the extreme wing of the Trump radicalized party pushed the moderates, who normally wouldn't even vote for open carry. They pushed the moderates into voting for open carry with training. But in any other day, that bill never would have made it to the Senate floor. It is always passed in the House.
Right.
I'm surprised they didn't pass constitutional carry. It may, you know what? The House did pass constitutional carry without training.
Right.
So, but in the Senate, we've been typically a more deliberative body. But in this day and age, they're primaried. When I mean the moderate Republicans are primaried if they don't kowtow to this radicalized group of Republicans running out here espousing these very, very dangerous policy legislative items for our state.
Let me ask you this too, Senator. Why didn't the opinions of law enforcement carry any weight in the House during this time of passing that particular bill?
Well, listen, I was on the subcommittee. It didn't carry any weight in the Senate. The Republicans profess to be the party of law enforcement, but their actions to the contrary. We didn't listen to SLED. We didn't listen to many of the chiefs of police, including our own Chief Reynolds here. We didn't listen to the Sheriff's Association. We didn't listen to the Fraternal Order of Police. They all, one by one, testified that this open carry, even with training, is going to make our jobs more difficult, make law enforcement jobs more difficult, because when they show up on the crime scene, they don't know who's the good guy with the gun or the bad guy with the gun. Everybody's got a gun. And we know from what we witnessed in Austin last week, where 13 people got injured, one person died. They've had open carry for some time. 2 people died.
Yes, sir.
They've had it open for some time. There was no hero that emerged that was able to apprehend the suspect before he shot numerous people and 2 deaths. And so there's no evidence that carrying openly will make our lives safer. Exhibit A is what happened last weekend. But even worse, the evidence that is shown demonstrates that it will make our lives a whole lot more problemsome or filled with problems, particularly in the case of law enforcement and the safety of our citizens, where people are walking around with military artillery on Main Street in Charleston or Main Street in Columbia, King Street in Greenville, and all across the state.
Well, then, should SLED do the background check to determine if the person should carry openly, just like it's done for the concealed permit?
Well, there is a background check process when you get the permit to carry concealed. And what I mean by getting the permit to carry by concealed, now it's open. So SLED does go through a background check process before the person will be given one of these open carry permits. And that background check process will be complete. But let me say this about that.
Okay.
That doesn't have anything to do with gun purchases, which is what the loophole is about. So everybody isn't going to go through this process. Only if you want to carry it open do you have to go through the process. What the closing the Charleston Loophole bill is, do it at the transfer of a firearm at purchase. So under current law, you only have to wait 2 days or 3 days in the state of South Carolina before a dealer can sell the gun to an individual wanting to buy the gun before the background check is completed. So you can go to a gun, and if the background check to a dealer and the background check is not complete in 3 days, the dealer can go ahead and sell to the individual without the background being completed. What the loophole bill requires it to be complete before the gun is sold. We've been even open to compromise for expanding it to 5 days in order to compromise, but the majority party is unwilling of any expansion on that background check period because they believe it's a trampling of the Second Amendment right. They clearly hadn't read the case law with respect to that. States have an inherent right, even in the best cases that the gun folks cite. The Supreme Court, who has analyzed the Second Amendment, has said that is not a right without some type of reasonable restriction, especially in the case of the safety of a state's citizens. And so, in my view, those constitutional arguments fail on its face, and it's not something we should be experimenting with when we talk about appealing decisions that we know are unconstitutional after we pass these gun laws.
Well, then, would this bill only increase the steady parade of gun charges for the solicitor's office?
Well, I think that's a possibility. I hadn't done the math on that, but if you look at it back abstractly, you would think the more availability of guns, you're going to have a higher propensity of people committing crimes with guns. Some of them will get caught, and therefore they will end up on the solicitors in some courtroom to adjudicate or prosecute those crimes.
Now, let me go back over to the Charleston Loophole because I want to ask this question. Why isn't there a Charleston Loophole if the law wasn't followed in your mind?
Repeat your question. I'm not sure I followed.
Yes, sir. To some people, there's really no Charleston Loophole because the law wasn't followed. Is that what you think?
Well, so in the case of Dylan Roof, it's my understanding that there was a background check being conducted, but it took them more than 3 days to complete it. The FBI does the background check, and they were struggling to determine whether or not there were charges in Richland County. And my understanding is that they verbally made contact with Richland County, but the correct county to have followed up would have been Lexington County. And so by the time they made the connection, remember, these background checks are not being done in South Carolina. They're being done by the FBI, I think in Washington, D.C., or it might be somewhere in Virginia. So they don't know our landscape. And I believe this was over a weekend. And so by the time they put the pieces together that this young man had a drug charge, he had already gotten the gun. And so when we talk about closing the loophole, we're really talking about taking it from 3 days to making sure that however many days it takes, that background check is complete before the dealer is authorized to sell that gun. In most cases, and I believe 98% of the cases, the background check comes back within a matter of minutes for over 95% of the people. So we're really talking about a small percentage of people who would have to be inconvenienced for maybe an extra couple of hours after 72 hours to complete the paperwork. And if a criminal wanted to do this, he or she could go in and jam up the system, give the incorrect Social Security number, incorrect address, and the FBI is trying to find out who this individual is and just tie him up for 3 days, and that dealer on the 4th day is willing to go ahead and sell the gun. He or she can do that. So criminals can game the system.
You talked earlier, Senator Kimpson, about obviously, Richland County verbally talking with Lexington County. How do you fix that?
Well, one of the things we did this year, and I'm pleased to say that this was an amendment to the open carry bill, and I had Senator Greg Gregory of York and myself a while back. We drafted this language, but we met with the clerks of court and SLED and other law enforcement, and we drafted an amendment to fix our system. Our computer systems. You'd be surprised. Some of us don't even have computers where these records are kept. Now, I don't know what counties those are, and I'm sure there are not many. But out of 46 counties, we're all over the place. I think there are about 3 or 4 different computer systems. And if we can't coordinate it in South Carolina, how do we expect somebody in Washington, D.C. to fix it? So what the bill did is call for the standardization of the criminal records systems, county for each county, so that we get on one database, and therefore, and it's automated, so that you don't have to pick up the phone. You're not reading some scanned document. You're not waiting on somebody to return your call. It's an automated system wherein the person who's doing the check, if it's the FBI, can log on to a system and access our court records, and is standard across the board. None of this county, this varies in Richland, this varies in Lexington. The other thing that it does, this bill does, is it makes sure that to the extent someone is charged with a crime and waiting the disposition of that crime, that is reported in the database within a certain time period. Before this bill passed, and it still is not signed into law, but right now, the magistrate's court had no time period to report that somebody had been charged with a crime. So, with no, they got a lot of work to do, the clerks in that office. So it could be 30 days after the most recent person who committed a murder before that charge, allegedly at that point committed a murder, that charge appears on that young man. He or she is released on bond, goes out and buys a gun. It's not even on the record yet if this is his first offense. And so we put a standardization of time, and it wasn't just for the magistrate's court. We were all over the place when it came to family court and circuit courts on when these charges and the disposition of these charges had to be updated. So now, when someone is researching, that I would say this, that's the good part about the open carry bill. 99% of it is bad, but that's the 1% good. And not to tout myself, sometimes you do have to recognize yourself. So I'm recognizing myself. But I will say that the senator from York, Senator Clymer, and myself, we were part of a subcommittee back when we first filed the closing the Charleston Loophole bill in the aftermath of the massacre of Mother Emanuel. We filed that reporting bill, but in that reporting bill, we also filed a 2-day extension from 3 to 5 days that would sunset in 2 years. So if we had passed that bill back then, we would have fixed our computer system, which, by the way, is going to take us about 2 years to do. But in the meantime, where we were getting that system fixed, we would have expanded the period from 3 to 5 days because we couldn't get any help. I wanted it complete, but nobody's going to go for that in a Republican majority. So we got some moderates to agree to sign on the 5 days, but even that bill didn't make it out of the judiciary because it had the background check component. So when we were passing the open carry bill, somebody proposes that we take out the background check period and put in what they view or deemed as the good piece of our legislation and tag it on to the open carry bill.
If there is a surge in background checks, but not in actual sales, does that mean that people are actually being denied, Senator?
If there is a surge in background checks and
not in actual sales,
and denial of sales,
but not a surge in actual sales, does that mean people are actually being denied?
One could say that a surge in background checks and everybody comes back clean. There are more gun sales. I guess you could say that. But it's hard to draw a conclusion that hypothetical. They may need more people buying guns at that time, so you have a historically higher point of gun sales. I can remember when President Obama got elected, there were an unprecedented amount of gun sales. So you may have had less denials, but on a percentage basis, it might have been greater than historical. You just had more people buying guns. So it's hard to draw a correlation without understanding the empirical data. So I can't. I hesitate to draw a conclusion one way or the other.
Can you lower the clip maximums to 10 for long guns, 15 for handguns, and stop allowing assault rifles to be sold at gun shows and only allow sales and transfers at certified dealers instead?
Well, look, I would be in favor. I'd be in favor of some type of approach.
Okay.
To limiting the number of rounds in a magazine, to eliminating bump stocks that help rapid fire increase the speed of rapid fire. All of this military artillery is not used to hunt deer or cattle or hogs. It's used to kill people. And so the question is, why do we have this military artillery that's not being used in Afghanistan or some other war-ridden territory? But why are civilians on our streets walking down Main Street with military artillery? The reality of it is, Quintin, when it comes to the issue of guns in the state of South Carolina, in terms of gun restriction and regulation, it's just a non-starter. You can cite all the data you want. We had physicians in the trauma centers come testify. We had law enforcement come testify. We had the business community come testify. We had parents and mothers come testify. But we were guided by a small group of radicalized Trump Republicans who were holding rallies out in the streets to encourage what has been before rational-minded, deliberative people, to encourage them to run roughshod over the minority in the Senate and the majority of people in the state of South Carolina. We polled this issue, and over 90% of the people of our state thought that background checks were a good idea and did not think, complete background checks, by the way, and did not think that this should be an issue that our General Assembly ought to be debating. So whatever the merits are, and we can walk through any statistic you want, South Carolina, the leading cause, this ought to this ought to be a tearjerker to every South Carolinian listening here. We are the highest state, and I'm citing Dr. Hink of MUSC. The leading cause of death among children in the state of South Carolina is gun violence. I didn't say COVID. I didn't say falling off a monkey bar. I didn't say a car accident. I didn't say violence, by a parent. I said gun violence. We've witnessed too many Chief Burgess and Chief Reynolds going to too many funerals, holding too many press conferences. Time and time again, we have these problems, but we cannot muster enough votes to stave off the gun expansion bills.
Well, let me ask you, I might be redundant with this, Senator, but the so-called Charleston Loophole, is this really the government's fault in your mind?
Yes. Look, all we can do is pass legislation. You can't regulate people's behavior, but we can study the issue and try to provide common sense solutions to address the issue. For example, we can't tell people not to drink and drive. We tell people not to drink and drive, but we can't regulate human behavior. There are a lot of people who drink and drive. But that doesn't mean we shouldn't have a DUI law to discourage people from drinking and driving, take their driver's license, put them in jail. I suspect if we didn't have those DUI laws, we'd have a lot more DUIs and a lot more fatalities if we didn't. So we're hoping if someone has to really go through a background check, if he or she has a criminal record, that would send a message to that person not to try to go in and buy a gun. Well, they say, well, people will go buy them unlawfully. Well, we can't solve every problem with a particular piece of legislation. All we can do is try to address what are obvious loopholes in our law with the elements and for legislation that we think necessarily to address the issue.
Now, if the FBI cannot complete, sorry about the bugs here, but if the FBI cannot complete a simple background check in 3 business days, what are they doing?
Well, I explained the problem
right
with Dylan Roof. They're searching let's just say it's on a Friday. You know, with the rise in the number of gun purchases, they are limited in resources, and trying to process all of the applications in a timely manner is a difficult job, and sometimes it requires follow up. 3 days is too short to try to get it done. We know that. There are cases right now where they're litigating that issue against the government. Many make the argument, we'll give them more time, they'll just wait longer to do it. And so, look, there are a lot of scenarios where you could create hypotheticals that the actions that we may take to address this issue won't solve the problem. We've never been able to solve every problem, but there is data that shows when you have background checks, complete statutes, there's less gun violence. There are less people who shouldn't be buying guns get denied gun purchases, and so there's evidence that having tighter regulations work. Now, the opponents of that will cite other statistics, many which don't make any sense, but nevertheless, each side has experts to espouse its views. But ask yourself the question: if anyone goes in and purchases a gun, lawful gun owners don't have a problem going through a background check. You don't fear a stop check for a DUI if you hadn't been drinking. And so the lawful gun owners don't have a problem with getting checked out before they buy a gun, because they know that they don't have anything to fear. Mistakes do happen, but it's never a foolproof. It's never a foolproof system when it comes to background checks.
That brings me to my next question: the consequences of striking the minimum education requirements for carrying a firearm. What are your concerns there?
And you're referring to the open carry bill?
Yeah, I should say that. I'm sorry for that.
Okay, and I'm not. So educate me. We struck passing a test, or what are you referring to there?
Yeah, the consequences of striking the minimum education requirements for carrying a firearm. What are your concerns with the requirements there?
Well, if we did do that, and I don't know, I'm struggling to remember what specific provision you're. I guess in theory, if you passed a test, it doesn't matter what level of education you completed, because the question is, can you fire a gun and do it so safely? So many will argue there's a disconnect between level of education or passing a written test or completing some level of high school or post high school level of education that will be indicative of whether or not you can safely operate a handgun. I'm stretching because I really don't recall what we did there.
No worries. Let me turn back to Mother Emanuel. I'm sitting not even about 3 or 4 blocks away from there. What do you think will be the future of that church in your mind?
Well, it's got a bright future. As you know, they are in the process of building a memorial to all 9 lives lost, as well as the survivors, a tribute to our survivors. And so that memorial will not only be historic in the sense of sort of giving the public a flavor of what those 9 lives stood for and the goals that they espoused and wanted to see when or worked on when they were living, but also there will be a social justice component to that facility, such that they can continue to work on the very near and dear causes that those 9 people fought for while they were living, as well as the causes that the survivors are to this day working on. And so it will be an interactive type of memorial where people who visit can engage. And what's important about that is that it's going to be located, and I was sharing this with Reverend Manning not too long ago in the committee. Kimberlyn Davis heads up the committee. The important part of that is this is going to be adjacent to the International African American Museum. So when the thousands of visitors fly into Charleston and go to the museum, more than, I believe it's a $90 million building. I toured it not too long ago. They can simply walk down the street and witness the legacy, the powerful civil rights legacy of the church, Mother Emanuel Church, one of the oldest churches in the African American Episcopal denomination. And so that's a testament to South Carolina. That's a testament to those 9 lives, and it will be a testament to our nation that on this solid ground, that we didn't just lie in a state of mourning, but we continued to build a memorial to honor those lives and continue to do the work that all of those courageous souls fought for when they were living.
Well, how's the funding going for the memorial right now?
Well, I think it's going well. I'm not speaking on behalf of the
right.
I'm not speaking on behalf of the foundation,
Right.
But I think that they've reached a monumental goal in excess of $8 million, and we are, many of us in the state legislature, Representative Wendell Gilliard, Marvin Pendarvis, Dion Tedder, and J.A. Moore, and Crystal Matthews, and many others are fighting for funding from the state budget.
But then, Senator Kimpson, I was doing my research and I did find an article from the state newspaper in which it showed that you proposed an earmark of $2 million to the memorial.
Yes.
And I understand too that one of your family members is the executive director of the foundation.
Yes. Well,
isn't that a conflict of interest?
Yeah. Well, let me just be clear. First of all, I'm proud to say that Kimberlyn Davis is associated with Mother Emanuel Church because it's a viable project who I've just told you is committed to social change. But you should know she's not a family member of mine. She's the mother of my children. And I'll just leave it there. But totally, that's a relevant question that you ask. But it's simply unrelated as we are no longer husband and wife.
But then how do you explain that to the voters and your constituents that, hey, you earmarked this money to the church?
Well, I don't have a problem explaining it to the voters because it's a worthwhile project. So you have a problem that I've been very transparent about. You only have a problem when you have a problem with explaining it to the public. So as I've indicated to you, she is doing great work. As I've done often with people I know, to the extent they're doing great work, I want to be supportive. I've delivered grants to Dr. Thaddeus John Bell, who's closing the gap in healthcare. I've delivered grants to the BOA Fair, who are certainly an organization mentoring children. We delivered grants to the city of North Charleston, And I could go on and on to the Urban League for the outstanding work they're doing. I don't think it's a conflict at all because I know her and she happens to be the mother of my children. There is a board that makes those decisions on how the construction will be moved forward. It's a very transparent project, and they're doing a tremendous benefit not only to the state of to the citizens of our state, but also to the nation by telling the story of the fallen 9 who lost their lives due to the racist acts of a murderer.
With the alleged financial problems that are being reported at Emanuel, can you guarantee that this earmark will be spent appropriately?
Yes.
Are you aware, Senator Kimpson, that the administration didn't inform the parishioners about this earmark?
Yeah, I don't know the details behind that. There's a foundation at Mother Emanuel that's been very transparent to the General Assembly, very transparent to the public at large. I read their materials that they sent to me. They've been able to successfully persuade not only the city, the county, and now the state, but many other philanthropic organizations to give money. And the foundation is not connected
Right.
Legally to the church. It's a different foundation. But let me say about the church. There have been investigations of the church. That's not unusual in a church, unfortunately. There are investigations, but to my knowledge, every investigation has turned up that there's been no wrongdoing. So it's not unusual in a church, particularly a church that has come under the microscope of national scrutiny, to have problems in the church. I grew up in St. John Baptist Church, and we were fortunate to have a minister for over 40 years. But there were some people in the church that, for whatever reason, didn't like the minister, and there was always controversy in the church. I know you're a good church-going brother, and so that should not be a surprise to you. And you couple it with the level of scrutiny and the level of attention that this church has received. It only exacerbates normal problems in a church.
You know a lot of those church members at Mother Emanuel. Have you talked to any of the church members about this particular memorial?
Oh yeah, all of the families support. Representatives of the family support this project. There may be one or two that I have not personally communicated with, and one I communicated with that did not want to see the Emanuel go forward. But on the whole, 99% of the families and representatives of the families are supportive of the project.
But when I talk to a lot of the people around town who actually attend this church, they say, hey, they're against this memorial. What do you say to them?
Well, I can't follow up on when I talk to a lot of people. So I don't know who you're talking about. I have spoken personally. There are 9 families involved, and I've spoken to the majority of the survivors. In fact, all representatives of the survivors. And I can tell you without fear of contradiction, those families have representatives that are supportive of this memorial forward. It's going forward. And I would just encourage those families that want to get involved to get involved. And you don't do that through me. You do that through the people who are running this foundation. There's a board.
Right.
They ought to have a website. So I would encourage everyone to get involved, because it is going forward, and we're going to make sure that we honor those fallen in an appropriate way. Not just one, but all 9 and the survivors.
And I know you just mentioned that I love church and love God and Jesus Christ, who's my Lord and Savior. So let me quote this, Matthew 6. It says, and I should say also unto thee that thou art Peter, and upon this rock I will build my church, and the gates of hell shall not prevail against it. As you know, ancestors and some slaves actually built Mother Emanuel Church. Why isn't the church per se the memorial?
Say the last part. Why isn't the church per se the memorial?
Yes, sir. The structure, as you know, down the street.
And so the issue is, Quintin, you have people from all across the world come to Mother Emanuel. Sometimes that's after church hours. It doesn't have to be on Sunday. It could be on Monday. And because of security reasons, the church is not open. Right now, people stand in the middle of Calhoun Street to put flowers on. You've seen it, flowers at the doorstep. And so this will be a place where people can come even after church hours to pay tribute to those fallen lives and the survivors on a regular, real-time basis without being limited to the hours that the church doors are open. Now, maybe the church doors are open 24 hours. I do not believe that's the case, at minimum, because of security concerns. Right. But I know of no person, except for when the doors were closed during COVID, that's been turned away from the church. So in addition to memorializing and understanding the history of the church in the church, they'll have this additional memorial to worship, witness, and experience the history and legacy of those 9 lives and survivors after the church is closed.
Now, obviously, the shooting took place inside the fellowship hall and downstairs. Where is the money for a new fellowship hall for Mother Emanuel?
Yeah, you'd have to direct those questions. I'm not here on behalf of the church.
Right, I know you're not.
The church has a pastor, Reverend Manning. I suspect it has a board. Certainly, if there are questions about the foundation. But I view my job as to deliver state funding to my district. And this is at the heart of my district. It's probably one of the biggest projects that is currently going on of any African American church downtown. We have fewer. And so my job is to make sure I deliver resources to continue the legacy and the social justice work of the 9 lives who were lost and the survivors. And while you mentioned that we were able to include in the Senate budget $2 million and maybe more in the House budget, we are not through. The budget is not final. And so I will be working hard to get this across the final goal line, as others do Confederate memorials and festivals and the other numerous parks and other numerous projects that different legislators request in a fashion. I don't view earmark as a bad thing. That's my job. You see money at the state level that's not being used, and you advocate for your district. I think the first earmark I requested was money for the city of North Charleston, almost $500,000, and they bought the first body cameras. Many call that pork barrel spending, and I don't have a problem to say I like barbecue. And so every project that I have advocated for, I make very transparent, and I hold it to the public, and I'm certainly comfortable with any scrutiny that comes along with that.
What else are you doing in your district right now?
Well, today I gave a resolution to the Boeing. You may look at my Twitter page at Kimpson for South Carolina. And in that resolution, we commended them for going to China 4 times and delivering PPE all across the United States when we're in the height of the pandemic. The other thing I've done just this week is I spoke to, your mask. I spoke to the Chamber of Commerce of Hilton Head on the importance of affordable housing. As you may know, I've been one of the staunchest advocates in the Senate for an inclusionary housing zoning bill that's essentially gone nowhere because the majority party thinks the market will take care of it, and so the market is not taking care of affordable housing. We have to have innovative, creative ideas and policy to stimulate the increase of affordable housing, particularly here in Charleston. So I'm building support across the state for this housing bill that is currently pending in judiciary. But quite frankly, this summer I have a full-time job. I'm talking to you from Motley, right? Probably one of the biggest cases in the country on data breach. And to be sure, I've minimized my Senate work because in the off session I have to do the full-time job so that I can continue to provide for my two beautiful children.
Well, Dan, that brings me to your future. What is it? Do you want to be governor or do you want to be in Washington?
Well, as you know, I've decided not to, as you may know, I've decided not to run for governor. I am focusing on, I have a son that's 4 years old. His name is Marlon. And I have a daughter that's 8 years old. Her name is Marley. They got great names, I can tell you that. And I'm focused on making sure I raise them and spend quality time with my two children. And so I'm not in a position to run a governor's race. It's a grueling race. You have to spend all the time on the road. So I can honestly say I'm comfortable here as a partner at Motley Rice. That probably, beyond my kids, that occupies most of my time. And with my Senate obligations, when I'm out of session, I'm doing back and forth between the kids and my law firm job. But when I'm in session, I'm engaged for the people of District 42. So I'm very comfortable, but I'm not complacent. And so right now there are no congressional seats open in the 6th congressional district. I'm supportive of Congressman Jim Clyburn, who is the highest ranking African American in the congressional delegation right now in the House. And so this is a good position for me to continue to advocate on behalf of people.
So who do you support for governor?
Well, I haven't made any endorsements yet, and probably won't do so on this show today. I think that
it's Quintin's close-ups.
I got to tell you, I think that Mia McLeod is doing a fantastic job. She just announced her campaign. She will be different. She will bring a level of energy to the campaign that I don't think, quite frankly, we've seen. We had Vincent. Vincent ran again, and then we had James, and of course, there's Joe Cunningham. So Vincent, James, and Joe. Joe is, he did an outstanding job as congressperson. I supported him there. He called me today, in fact. We talk often. He's a good friend of mine. But I'm going to let this campaign play out, and I want to hear the merits of the argument. And I certainly want to make sure that we have a fiery debate, an intellectual exercise in policy. But what I'm going to be looking to is how excited about the base that these candidates are able to fire up in a way that will make them victorious at the polls.
What is the argument with the base?
We'll see as the campaign goes along. The base, wants to see the quality of life improved. We should not be spending all our time kowtowing to people who are never going to vote for us. There are a lot of disaffiliated and discouraged Republicans who I think will look at the Democratic candidates. But first and foremost, we want to make sure we spend our time with the bread and butter Democrats who've been supportive of us through thick and thin. And so my advice to those candidates would be to make sure that they pay attention to the base first. And then, to the extent there's time, let's have a program designed to reach those people who have become disaffiliated or discouraged by the Republican Party.
State Senator Marlon Kimpson, thank you so much for your time. And again, welcome back to Quintin's Close-Ups, and I hope to have you back again.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you. I'll see you soon.